to ask the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union if he will make a statement on the release of the impact assessments arising from sectoral analysis carried out by Her Majesty's Ministers to the Select Committee on exiting the European Union.
Minister Robin Walker.
Speaker, on the 1st of November, this House passed a motion asking that impact assessments arising from sectoral analyses be provided to the Committee on exiting the European Union. Mr. Speaker, this government takes very seriously its parliamentary responsibilities and has been clear it would be providing information to the committee. In the past 3 weeks, departments have worked to collate and bring together this information in a way that is accessible and informative. I'm glad to be able to confirm that this information has been provided not only to the Committee for exiting the European Union, but also to the House of Lords EU Committee and indeed devolved administrations. I can also, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, inform the House that we have initiated discussions with the parliamentary authorities to make this information available to all colleagues through a reading room. We were clear from the start that we would respond to the motion, but also that the documents did not exist in the form requested. Indeed, I made clear to the House during the debate on the day that there has been some misunderstanding as to what the sectoral analysis actually is. It is not a series of 58 impact assessments. The sectoral analysis, as I said, is a wide mix of qualitative and quantitative analysis contained in a range of documents developed at different times since the referendum. The House of Commons itself has recognised that while ministers should be as open as possible with Parliament, the government also has an obligation to consider where it would be in the public interest for material to be published. Furthermore, it's important to recognise in some cases there are commercially and confidential information in the analysis, and in many cases the analysis was developed to underpin advice to ministers on negotiation options in various scenarios. It is well understood, as was the case under successive administrations, that such advice to ministers must remain private. In light of all that, my Right Honourable Friend the Secretary of State made a statement on the 7th of November in which he explained that given the documents did not exist in the form requested, it would take some time to collate and bring together information in a way that was accessible and informative for the committee. He committed that these reports would be provided within 3 weeks. In providing the information to the committee yesterday, we have met that commitment. Parliament has endorsed the responsibility of ministers not to release information that would undermine our negotiating position, and contrary to what has been asserted in some places, the committee did not give any firm assurances that what was passed to them would not subsequently be published in full. Where there are precedents for government agreeing to pass information to select committees in confidence, these have been on the basis of assurances received before material is shared, or a clear set of rules such as those governing intelligence material. When he met the Secretary of State, the chairman of the Select Committee did say that he was willing to enter into a dialogue after the Select Committee had received documents from the government. But this is not the same as assurance that if we had provided confidential or sensitive material, it would not be published, and it is not in keeping with the usual practice of committees on these sensitive issues. As such, the sectoral reports provided do not contain information which would undermine the UK's hand in negotiations or material that is commercially or market sensitive. But the House should be in no doubt this has been a very substantial undertaking. We have been as open as possible, subject to the overwhelming national interest of preserving our negotiating position. We have collated over 800 pages of analysis for the committees, less than a month from the motion being passed, and this covers all the 58 sectors. We now consider the motion of the 1st November 2017 to have been satisfied.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, transparency and accountability are two words this government does not understand. On the 1st of November, after a 3-hour debate, this House voted in favour of a humble address requiring all 38 sectoral analyses to be passed to the Brexit Select Committee. Not some of the reports, not redacted copies, the full reports. Yes. The government did not seek to amend the humble address, nor did it vote against the motion. After your advice to us, Mr. Speaker, the government accepted that the motion was binding. It is simply not open to the Secretary of State to choose to ignore it and to pass to the Select Committee the documents that he chooses. Whether he's in contempt of Parliament is a matter we'll come to at some later date, but he's certainly treating Parliament with contempt. The Secretary of State says, and the Minister has reported, that he did not get assurances from the Select Committee about how the documents would be used. The Minister therefore better answer some pretty blunt questions this morning. What assurances were sought that were not given? And he better tread carefully, because there'll be an audit trail here, and if he can't answer that question, if he didn't pursue the assurances, if he didn't suggest a course of action that was rejected, his cover for not disclosing these will be blown. Mr. Speaker, this is not a game. This is the most important set of decisions that this country has taken for decades. They need to be subjected to proper scrutiny. In my experience, the biggest mistakes are made when decisions are not scrutinised. And can I remind the Minister and the Secretary of State that until this House passed the motion on the 1st of November, ministers routinely claimed that these analyses were extensive and authoritative. They say they've now put the documents together. Mr. Speaker, in September they answered a Freedom of Information request. The first question is, do you hold the material? To which the answer was yes. And that calls into serious question the explanation now being put before this case. Finally this, Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply concerned that the sum total of documents generated by the government's work on the impact of their approach to Brexit on the economy can be squeezed into 2 lever arch files. That's the volume of paperwork I would have expected for a pretty routine Crown Court trial in my old world. If this is the case, we should all be worried. Is that the extent of the analysis? But either way, it's a very sorry state of affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me address some of the misconceptions in the Right Honourable Gentleman's statement, because we have not edited or redacted reports. At the time the motion was passed and subsequently, we were clear that the documents did not exist in the form requested. We have collated information in a way that doesn't include some sensitive material, but the documents, which he freely admits he hasn't seen, do not contain redactions. It is noticeable that the original suggestion of redactions in the debate on the 1st of November came from him. And came from him speaking from the front bench of the opposition. He also said in the debate that he had accepted all along that the government should not put into the public domain any information that would undermine our negotiating position, and that he accepts there is a level of detail and confidential issues and tactics that should not be discussed. Statements that the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman made during the debate itself. And let me tell him the logical consequences of that position. He suggested that there are mechanisms available which allow for sharing of material in advance for select committees, and he's right, of course, as I addressed in my opening statement. My Secretary of State met with the chair of the Select Committee and discussed these terms. It was very clear that, as the chair has said himself in Parliament, that he wanted to receive all the documents first before he would give any assurances as to the way in which they would be treated. And that, on that basis, we had to be clear that we had to protect commercially sensitive information. In the absence of any restrictions on what the Select Committee might do with the documentation, the government had to be mindful of its obligations not to allow sensitive information to be public. But let me be clear again, we've been as open as possible within those obligations. The material we provided to the Select Committee is very substantial. It is bizarre for the Right Honourable Gentleman to dismiss it without having yet seen it. And when committee members have had an opportunity to consider it fully and to reflect on it, I think they will reasonably conclude that the government has fully discharged the terms of the motion. We have shared over 800 pages of analysis with the committee. The analysis described the activity in each sector and the current regulatory regime for the sector. The report set out existing frameworks from across the globe for how trade is facilitated between countries in the sectors and sector views. These views cover a range of representative cross-sector views from businesses and organisations across the UK, and we've taken care to incorporate up-to-date views from stakeholders, such as views on the proposed implementation period. To his question, does this represent the sum of the government's analysis? Of course it does not. The motion referred to sectoral analyses, and we have responded to a motion by sharing those sectoral analyses. I note the statement from the Select Committee following its meeting this morning, and I welcome the fact that arrangements will be made for committee members to view documents in confidence. I think that when they do, they will find there is a great deal of useful and valuable information here. I can assure the House and the Committee that the Secretary of State will also be accepting their request to discuss the content. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the House that my department takes its responsibilities to Parliament extremely seriously. We have provided a vast amount of factual information to help the committees and this House in their scrutiny. I am confident we have met the requirements of the motions whilst respecting our overriding duty to the national interest.